We'll now move to our third question from the Canadian Life and Health Insurance Association, represented by the chair of their board of directors, Mr. George Mahatchi, who's president and CEO of the Independent Order of Foresters.
Thank you,
Proceed,
Janet.
please.
Well, continuing the discussion on pensions, in December 2010, all federal, provincial, and territorial finance ministers agreed to adopt pooled registered pension plans as an important measure in improving opportunities for the millions Canadians who don't currently have access to workplace retirement plans. By reducing employer obligations and pooling employers together to achieve lower costs, PRPPs will particularly appeal to small and medium-sized businesses and the self-employed, and such plans need not require the employer to make a contribution. Federal, provincial, and territorial officials continue to work towards a framework that can be implemented in a harmonized way across the country with a target date sometime in 2012. So my question is, does your party support the implementation of PRPPs specifically? And given that the objective is to provide access ultimately for all employees to save at the workplace, does your party support requiring all employers to offer some form of workplace retirement plan, PRPPs, traditional pension plans, or group RSPs to their employees?
Thank you very much. And the order will be Mr. Rossi, Mr. Prue, and Minister Pupatello. Mr. Rossi.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. Again, as we said earlier, we're committed to ensuring that there are multiple options for people to be able to save effectively for their retirement. On the specifics of the PRPP, clearly the consultation is ongoing. I don't want to preempt what conclusions will come out, but we're following it very closely, and we're looking for creative solutions, and this is going to be part of the package. We're committed to doing our fair share on regulatory harmonization and reduction. We, again, do not believe that a government-only solution is the way to move forward. We will oppose increasing the CPP as it acts as a payroll tax increase, hurts people's take-home pay, and also acts as an increased burden on the business community. So again, in part of your question where you said where there are options that don't necessarily involve employers having to contribute as well, that's an important consideration for us. And again, let's not make this just government to government. Let's ensure that the industry is involved in coming up with the creative solutions that we need.
Thank you, Mr. Rossi. Thank you, Mr. Rossi. We'll move on to Mr. Prue, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. Again, it should come as no surprise that we do not believe that the PRPP option is the best option for Ontarians or for Canadians, particularly in the present policy context. There was some qualified support from federal and provincial finance ministers in this context, but it also was in conjunction with enhancing the CPP. The CPP seems to have been taken off the table because of opposition by Alberta, by Quebec, and possibly from the Harper government. And we believe that this leaves a very unbalanced approach towards a private retirement savings option. As it is going forward, and what we're seeing is that a privately administered defined contribution plan with no obligation for the employer to contribute is not the way to go. And that is why we in the Ontario NDP have developed our own Ontario Retirement Plan, a publicly administered defined benefit plan for those who don't have a workplace plan but who want one. And if you ask ordinary people what they really want, is they want a pension at the end of their working lives. And far too many of them, have no pension. And we have to develop a pension that is workable for them, not one that will bankrupt the system, as has been suggested by my colleague, but one that works for all of them, just as the Canada Pension Plan has for generations.
Thank you very much, Mr. Prue. Minister Pupatello.
Thank you. And I will refer again to the activity of Minister Duncan as our finance minister, who was actually one of the leaders at the national table on this conversation related to the pooled pension plan. And they haven't finished that work, so it's hard to say with any certainty we agree with this, because this has not been fully completed and with all of its intent and what it's going to mean across the country, just to say that we've got to stand on our record. We're going to do more of what we've been doing, and that is leading these discussions and not running from these very complicated, difficult, and what could be costly if not done properly, solutions for people. And I'm mindful that you cannot have a conversation about pension without talking about health care. And when you ask folks what they're expecting in their old age, they need to know that the system will take care of them, both in long-term care, in drug pricing, for example. Will I have drug coverage? These are the big questions. And in fact, why the pension issue becomes so explosive. It ultimately, will I be able to afford to care for myself? So when Ontario managed down the drug prices across the board, it was opposed by both parties in the House except for the governing party. And this is important to note. Pension plans, all of those companies, the green shields of the world knew that this would drive their price down. In that way, they can make better offerings of those benefits for those pension plans. And this is key. Our long-term care initiatives of building more beds in the system so that people will be able to afford to be in them is key. And when opposition parties vote against these initiatives, then they're really not understanding the full spectrum of what it is to age and what our costs are going to be.
Thank you, Minister Pupatello.
Thank you
very much. We'd now like to go on to the fourth question from the Canadian Bankers Association. And for that, I'm going to turn to CBA's Vice President of Communications, Mr. Robin Walsh. Robin.
Good morning. Actually, a discussion from pensions to financial literacy is a good segue. So financial literacy is at the core of what the financial sector does and the services it provides. A financially literate population is good for households, the financial sector, and the economy more broadly. The financial sector has a vested interest in financially literate customers. That's why banks and the financial services industry are very active in financial literacy. The groups around the table here today have their own programs, are very active in supporting community programs. And I think the role of the government also has a very good role to play in financial literacy. And that's why you saw the task force, federal government appointed a task force on financial literacy 2 years ago. It reported earlier this year with 30 recommendations. Here in Ontario, you had the working group on financial literacy that came forward with an implementation of how to integrate financial literacy into the formal school curriculum. So with that as the context, my question is, governments have tremendous opportunities for putting in place initiatives and programs that address the financial literacy needs of people at the different stages of their life, from young people starting out with saving and learning the basics to seniors getting ready to retire. While the Ontario government is moving forward with financial literacy in the schools, what else should it do to ensure that people have the knowledge, the skills, and confidence necessary to make responsible financial decisions? Specifically, what do you suggest be done to help adults, new Canadians enhance and maintain their financial literacy skills?
Thank you, Robin, and we'll go to Minister Pupatello, Mr. Rossi, and Mr. Prue. Minister.
Thank you. I'm delighted to have that question because I feel like we could have written that one. We've been doing a lot of work, the Ontario government has in this area. Leanna Pendergast from Kitchener, one of our new MPPs, principal by trade, now MPP, parliamentary assistant to the finance minister, actually had a hand in developing the program that is now part of the curriculum in Ontario schools. That is a huge step forward because we talked about it for years and now we've finally done it. So I want to stand on our record to say these are the kinds of creative things we're prepared to do, not by ourselves. We work directly with industry in that curriculum development and it will work. Our seniors secretariat is another area where when you speak of the spectrum, what they need to know as kids is very different from what seniors need to know about privacy, security matters on finances. All of those things is part and parcel of a conversation through the senior secretariat that says how can we do this outreach through our senior citizens centres across Ontario? How do we develop these clever programs for young people? How do we integrate IT into how we're teaching? Can we have applications that they can pull down on their iPad and their iPhones so that they can learn these things? This is some of the very exciting activity that is going on today in our government today. So you've got some very energetic people. I hope that they will all be back and leading the charge so that we'll be a jurisdiction that the rest of the world's going to look to in education on how people can learn about controls on financing. Thanks, Janet.
Thank you very much, Minister. Mr. Rossi.
Well, as the son of immigrants, I understand all too well the detriments of lack of financial planning and the difficulties, particularly in the early stages. I mean, in the early years, for my parents, advanced financial planning was money in the mattress. And it thankfully did work out all right for us in large part because of hard work and prudence and families taking care of one another. But it was a lucky circumstance as opposed to something that came from proper basics. For my own case, I'm very fortunate to have had a financial advisor who's helped me through various stages in my own career. And clearly this has to be seen as a lifelong learning because at different stages of one's career, at different stages, different information is required. I think the key thing in your question, Robin, is really on the coordination. I mean, the industry clearly is heavily invested in this. Governments work on it to lesser and greater extents across the country. We applaud the work of Minister Flaherty's task force and all of the participants in that. We look forward to continuing to work with them should we form government to increase that coordination and ensure we're getting the biggest bang for the buck.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rossi. Mr. Prue.
Thank you very much, and you're not going to hear much disagreement from the NDP on this. So we think that the Task Force on Financial Literacy and its recommendations are bang on. We support all of the 30 recommendations that have been made. And all we ask and all we know and we need to know that what has to happen is that there has to be a collaborative approach. The financial literacy needs to come and initiatives need to come from schools, from governments, from financial institutions, employers, labor organizations, voluntary bodies, immigrant and ethnic groups. Everyone has to be out there telling people and informing people of how they can make the best use of their money, how they can save for retirement and everything else. So the expertise is probably best in this room. We leave it to you to develop the tools, but we ask that you go out to all of those sectors and all of those people who might ordinarily not be part of this financial literacy exercise. Tell them about it, make them understand, and give them the tools and the pamphlets and everything else they need in many languages to get that information out.